Welcome to the True Hope podcast, where we take a deep dive into mental health's many physiological and psychological aspects. This is the show for you if you're looking for motivation, inspiration, knowledge, and solutions, and that's what we are all about here at True Hope Canada. And True Hope Canada is a mind and body-based supplement company dedicated first and foremost to promoting brain and body health through non-invasive nutritional means. For more information about us, you can visit truehopecanada.com. Today, I welcome Dr. Bonnie Kaplan to the podcast. Now, Dr. Kaplan is a research psychologist and semi-retired professor from the University of Calgary. Dr. Kaplan has over 180 peer-reviewed publications. After retiring from full-time academic research in 2016, she turned her attention to raising the profile of nutrition in mental health. In 2021, she co-authored the book The Better Brain with Professor Julia Rucklidge. Her primary goal is to influence the way mental health is treated and is delivered. Today, we're going to be discussing the better brain. Enjoy the show. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome, Dr. Kaplan, back to the show. How are you? What is going well?
I love your positive invitation to talk about what's going well. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for having me on the interview. Life is going pretty well. It's busier than I expected because I've been retired for 7.5 years since 2016. But when Julie and I published our book, we had no idea that that would result in so much interest. And it's kept us very busy indeed. But that's good. That's how we hope to change the world.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about the book in depth during the interview. And I've read it. I've read it myself a couple of times, and it's a wonderful read. So we'll make sure that people learn a lot more about it and inspire them to get the book themselves. We had you on the show on episode 11, which was many shows ago. I'd say 2.5 years ago now, and we discussed micronutrients and mental illness. And I'm going to leave a link in the show notes for people if they want to connect and listen to that show. But before we jump going forward, for those who don't know who you are or know what you do, would you mind giving us a little bit of an introduction, please?
All right. I am a semi-retired professor from the University of Calgary. I was in the Faculty of Medicine, and my role was mostly clinical research. My background is in experimental and biological psychology with postdoctoral training in neuroscience. And so I was interested in the biological basis of behavior. And if you're interested in the biological basis of behavior, Simon, you have to learn something about nutrients. And so that's how I got into this whole field.
Amazing. And you wrote this book right here. There's a copy behind you. I've got a copy here, The Better Brain. You wrote this book with Dr. Julia Rucklidge in 2021.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct. It came out in April 2021.
And I believe that you've been working with Julia for a long period of time. There are a lot of research papers between the two of you. Can you tell us a little bit about that relationship and why you guys decided to write this book together, and who is it for?
Okay, there are several questions buried in there, but I'll attack them all.
Let's
So
go.
Julia is originally Canadian from Ontario, and she came out to Alberta to do her master's and PhD under my supervision. But I was not studying nutrition at that time. I had studied it previously. I'd gotten, frankly, very discouraged about my ability to study nutrition. She was studying ADHD, and then she went on to do a postdoctoral fellowship at Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. And then for an adventure, she and her husband from Alberta, moved to University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand. And that adventure has extended now for, I guess, almost 20 years. So she's my former PhD student, but when she had me come out to New Zealand for a visiting fellowship in 2003, I presented our preliminary data on broad spectrum micronutrient formulas, in particular Empower, made by True Hope, and told her, Julia, I think this is real, and I think I'm going to keep studying it, and you have to too. She said she was too busy to do that, but she would look into it. And I think her first paper was published in 2008. And then I gradually moved toward retirement, and Julia now has probably the most active research program in the world on broad spectrum micronutrient treatment of mental disorders. But we've continued to write together. Now, you asked me one other question buried in there, and that is, why did we write the book? And I tell everyone we wrote that book in part out of frustration, because we were publishing all of our work, hers and mine, in mainstream medical journals. And yet we were not seeing any change in practice. And we decided it's time to educate the general public. So that book is not written for our scientific colleagues or our medical colleagues. It is written at the level for the general public. And everyone says it's a good read, and they follow along with it and begin to understand the central issue, which is every bite of food that we eat is mostly to feed our brains. And we need to become aware of what we eat. And sometimes we need to take broad spectrum micronutrients too.
That's very interesting. Just as you said that little piece there about like everything, every bite of food that we consume is primarily the nutrition from that food is necessary for the brain. I feel
That's
like
right.
we, especially even myself, like I would think that most people believe that what we consume is more about like muscle and growth and kind of everything below the head. So do
Right.
we how have we like misunderstood how have we misunderstood that so badly?
We've been taught wrong. I mean, when I was a child growing up, we ate Wonder Bread, that white bread stuff, because it built strong bodies 8 ways, which was baloney. I was taught you had to eat right so that you'd have strong muscles and bones. Muscles and bones. Now, I have nothing against having strong muscles and bones. And of course, we want our children to grow, but we are mostly, in terms of metabolic demands on nutrient intake, we are mostly feeding our brains and also our hearts, the two most metabolically active and demanding organs that we have.
Very interesting. So that should certainly change maybe a little bit about why you might consume food. I mean, there's a huge, we have towards like maybe the end of life, or even for a lot of people, maybe in their 60s, they're dealing with like dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that. And that's quite clearly a neurological brain disorder.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about what's on their plate, feeding their brain for their brain health. Me
Mm.
personally, a big reason why I choose to eat primarily like good quality foods is because I do not want to lose my mind when I'm 70, 80 years old, so I have this
Yeah.
motivation now to feed my brain and get my brain used to good quality nutrition. So it's very, very good at using that. So it's interesting that we've been taught we've just been taught the wrong, I guess, wrong information in regards to like why we consume food.
I'd like to comment on the cognitive decline or dementia story, if I may. I
Absolutely.
heard someone say something recently, who I think would know, but I can't, as a scientist, I have not seen a source on this. They said that over 400 medications have been developed for the treatment of dementia, and every single one of them has failed in clinical trials to show any benefit. I don't know if that number 400 is correct, but we do know that after many years and tons of money, we don't have a medication to reverse dementia. But we do have articles, studies in good journals, which are not being covered by the media, which show that you can slow cognitive decline with broad spectrum micronutrients. And that's a different formula, not the one that True Hope makes, but it's one of the Centrum formulas that's very broad spectrum. I mean, it's similar in that it has vitamins and minerals. And there are some studies that started coming out in July about that. And there are also studies on high dose B vitamins. B vitamins are very important for the brain. They're not the only important ones, but they're very important, showing reduced cognitive decline and reduced brain atrophy. In other words, less shrinkage in seniors with who began with mild cognitive decline. And that was a placebo controlled trial done at Oxford University. So, and that was with B complex compared to placebo.
Well,
So
that's
we
very
know
interesting.
nutrition is very important. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as soon as you're telling me about like there's been, 400 medications that let's just say have failed in regards to the treatment of Alzheimer's or dementia, I guess when they are researching and developing and manufacturing these drugs or medications, they are primarily one chemical unit rather than looking at trying to heal a very complex condition such
Right.
as Alzheimer's with a much more broad approach. I mean, nutrition and supplementation is certainly one aspect of that, but you can't really get exercise out of a pill. You can't get community out of a pill. You can't get um, all the other very important pieces that are very important for your mental health, even just like playing like doing puzzle games and using your brain in different ways and keeping it like working out. So it's actually it's no surprise to me that those 400 medications have not been very successful, because they're looking at it from a very reductionist point of view rather than, the treatment for a condition such as Alzheimer's, which can, be building up for 20, 30 years for some individuals. The approach has to be a holistic, broad spectrum approach rather than this like one kind of sniped shot silver bullet.
Right. You said that very well. I'm not going to add.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, great. That's good. You mentioned that during your career you were discouraged from studying nutrition. Can you tell us a little bit about that? It's interesting.
Well, I've been discouraged more than once. I'll just give you two examples. I was discouraged in the 1980s when I'm not going to go into detail, but I was pursuing some, pardon me, some work on nutrition. It wasn't broad spectrum micronutrients, but I ran into families with very fixed ideas, and I realized it's really hard to study nutrition for a lot of reasons, but one of which is everybody has an opinion. And that
Right.
hadn't been true of any of my earlier work. But of course, we all eat. So we all have opinions about food. So that was one point. And I mention it because my husband reminds me that in, I think it was 1989 or 1990, I said, that's it. I'm done with nutrition. I'm going back to I was doing some behavior genetics, etc. I just don't want to study nutrition again. Then I met Tony Stephan and David Hardy, who they hadn't formed a company yet, but they eventually formed True Hope. And I got sucked in again to studying nutrition. It sounded so interesting what their observations were. Um, and then the discouragement came not from me, but from Health Canada. They said, you can't study vitamins and minerals, they're too dangerous. There's unbelievable ignorance out there about what is dangerous and what is not. And so they shut down my first really completely randomized placebo controlled trial. And I wasn't able to study any broad spectrum formulas again for it was at least 4 years, which really disrupted my education of graduate students. I had to put them back onto other projects, and it disrupted my career very much. So they did a lot of harm.
What was the research that you were doing that was shut down?
And that was a controlled trial, meaning it was randomized, placebo controlled in adults, not children, but adults with bipolar disorder.
And Health Canada deemed that the products that you were using in that trial were dangerous and it was a risk to those individuals, so they stopped the trial.
They did, and I got a letter from the Director General of Health Canada saying, send your already in, patients who are all, pardon me, Simon,
It's okay.
it's just very dry here, already
Hmm.
enrolled in the trial, send them back to their psychiatrist. They should be put back on medication. True
That's quite
story.
That's quite alarming. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we, on the True Hope Canada website, we had 35 peer-reviewed medical journals on there. A lot of them done by yourself and by Julia, but we are not allowed to share them with the general public anymore. We're not allowed to share truthful health information. So we have like these big red censored signs over each and every journal on our website now. So we're not allowed to share that information. And a lot of that research was government funded. So it's very confusing what Health Canada are attempting to, I guess, stop people having access to an alternative to pharmaceuticals, I guess.
Correct. That is definitely what they're doing, and unfortunately, I'm afraid they're going to win. And they've been winning in other countries. I haven't looked at your website in quite a while. The red censored thing that is over it, does it leave open the name of the journal and the volume number? And
No,
no, you
no, no.
can't even do that? So people can't
Everything
look
is
up.
spreaded out. People unfortunately can't look it
Yeah,
up. They can certainly go to other websites where it's available in other countries that don't quite
yeah,
yet have the authoritarian regime of Health Canada. But yeah, it's certainly interesting that you were seeing those roadblocks many years ago, and they seem to just be getting stronger and stronger
it
and
is getting
stronger.
worse.
And it's certainly getting worse. Yeah, we're seeing
Yeah,
lots of we're seeing bills being passed that would see potentially the end of good quality natural health products in this country. So we're going to move on from that because that's a big topic of itself, and we have amazing interviews with Sean Buckley about that. So people
oh,
can
good,
certainly check
okay.
that out if they want to.
I was going to
We've had
give you his website, but
oh
no
yeah.
need, okay.
Yeah, the nhppa.org is an incredible resource, the best possible resource if you are concerned about natural health products here in Canada. And yeah, we've had Sean speaking with David probably 5 or 6 times in the last 12 months to keep people up to date with what's going on. And they're doing incredible work over there as well. So
Good.
I want to come back to your book, The Better Brain, here. And you explain in the book that there's a mental health crisis, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that crisis. And do you think that there is hope to turning it around in Canada, let's say?
Yeah. Well, let me say a word or two about the crisis. I often hear people say, well, life is so much harder now. It's so much more stressful. That's why more people are being diagnosed. And I always say, and I don't remember if I put this in the book, my parents and grandparents lived through World War One, the flu epidemic of 1917, World War II, the Holocaust, the Depression, the I'm sure I've left some things out. Horrible, horrible things. I don't think life is more stressful now. We do have social media that informs us of it more quickly. I think what has changed is our resilience. Our resilience is down. People don't cope as well. They don't, they are less in control of their emotions. They are less well regulated. And we also have the diagnostic and statistical manual that gives the categories and the diagnostic criteria for mental disorders. I can't quote the numbers, but it's gone from a skinny little book to a big fat volume because now there are so many different disorders, and many of them, they don't really seem like disorders. They seem like um, being somewhere on the continuum.
Right.
Everything is on a continuum. So, for a long time, there was a big debate in the psychiatric literature. Is mental illness or are mental disorders really increasing, or is it just that more people are seeking help? And we want them to seek help because there is help out there for some of them. And talk therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, meditation, relaxation, exercise. Why isn't nutrition in that list, though, Simon? Very
Hmm.
few are talking about nutrition. And so now I don't see any of those debates anymore about is it real? Is the increase real? Everybody seems to accept it's real. When over 20% at any given point in time, this is called point prevalence, 20% of our population has been diagnosed and is being treated for a mental disorder. And when I was a child, it was one or less than 1%. That's a real change. That's World Health Organization data. And
Hmm.
here's the one that is really scary, also from the WHO, and that is lifetime prevalence. Lifetime prevalence is 50%. That means that at some point in your life, 50% of the people you know, or you or people in your family, will be diagnosed and treated for a mental disorder. Again, that's World Health Organization data, and it's shocking to me.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of people struggling out there. I completely agree with you in regards to the fact that we've never had it better. Like human beings have never really had it better in regards to, yeah, you listed off some important things. Like my grandparents and great grandparents, certainly World War I and World War II over in Europe was a pretty horrific time, and there's nothing really been compared to that, in recent times. So I don't agree in regards to like we're living in like more stressful times. I think that the internet and social media is absolutely devastating our youth. I think their
Mm.
access to fear and propaganda within the news as well is just absolutely wreaking havoc with our nervous system in a way that we have not evolved to deal with it. So our nervous systems are without question just all over the place, not regulated. We have a very big disconnect within our brain and with our body. And yeah, we have so many people who are ill, people who are really struggling, but there are some like cheap, free, easy ways in which we're able to actually deal with a lot of issues that people might have, whether that's exercise, friendship, community, family. And if we think, every time I'm on the bus or I'm in a coffee shop, I kind of like observe and look around, and everyone's kind of on their phone on their own,
Mm.
in this isolated environment, even when they have people around them. So like I think cell phones and social media have got a big part to play in the fact that a lot of people are dealing with some really serious stuff. But we don't have government entities explaining a lot of like, this is why you might be feeling like this, and here are some solutions that don't require a prescription and won't have side effects to them. So it's a real big shame. I think we're being let down significantly by our educational institutions, being let down by our government institutions and our health institutions as well. But there are people like you out there who are writing amazing books for not for the medical community, but for the everyday individual. And this book is a really amazing read and has got a lot of things that you can take into your life right away that will have a big impact. And I think just the re-education around food, nutrients, and what that does within the body is going to help people maybe make better choices when it comes to the food that they choose to consume. We're going to talk a little bit later about some things that we can certainly avoid that's going to support our brain health. But yeah, I'd love to help everyday people understand how nutrition can affect the body's ability to create all of the amazing things that it creates, all these building blocks that we need to survive and thrive. So I wonder if you could give us a little bit of a foundational understanding of how what we eat affects what our body can actually create.
Sure. I love teaching this, Simon, and it's in almost every talk I give, and it's in chapter 2 of the book, okay, with a diagram, which our editors weren't sure we should have because it shows a simplified piece of the tryptophan pathway from the brain. And they said, this is for the general public. And we said, everyone has to learn this very simple concept. So metabolism is a big technical sounding word, but all that it means is the transformation of one compound to another. So when you eat, things get changed from like tryptophan to becoming serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. And you want those steps to happen. Well, in our physiology, almost all, maybe all, I'm not absolutely sure it's 100%, but almost all of those metabolic steps depend upon an enzyme. And so we call them enzymatic reactions. And you don't have to learn the names of any of them to understand the general concept. Enzymes make a compound like let's call it X, get transformed to Y. But enzymes work best if you feed them lots of cofactors. And as anyone who's taken a physiology course knows, vitamins and minerals are the cofactors. That's why we consume vitamins and minerals. That's why we have evolved or how we have evolved to need them. They are the cofactors that enable our enzymes to do their work in transforming chemical A to chemical B, tryptophan to serotonin, etc. And if you don't have enough of those cofactors on board because you haven't eaten a vegetable in a week and you haven't eaten any fruit and you're just eating ultra processed rubbish, then you end up with sluggish pathways. And I often say, although not in formal lectures, but I'll say it here in a podcast, sometimes I think we should throw out the DSM and have one diagnostic category, sluggish pathways, because something ain't working right in the brain. And when we can turn it around by providing more cofactors, and we can't always, okay, because there are all these other things out there like dysfunctional families and other problems. But when we can turn it around with nutrients, then that diagnosis probably should have been sluggish pathways. And I want to say one more thing related to that. When somebody gets very significantly better on something like Empower Plus, and they don't always, but when they do, we always, in our clinical trials, we always see across the board improvement. So they're maybe selected to be in our study because they have ADHD, okay? And maybe they have the three cardinal symptoms. But then they get better in terms of mood regulation, of calmness, not just focus and lack of, decreased impulsivity, all these other things. That's because our brain doesn't have little boxes in it. And when you improve your nutrient intake, it's affecting the whole brain. So, as I say, that child should have been diagnosed as having sluggish pathways, maybe. But that's not going to happen in my lifetime. Did I answer
Well, that
your original
that
question?
was that was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, I think that for a lot of people, understanding that there are there are steps to producing the things in our brain, within our hormonal system, within our digestive system. It's complex, but our biology has kind of made it very, very simple. We just have to consume the foods that contain those ingredients. Hopefully, we've got a uh, a, a decent digestive system. We've got the ability to like chew our food really well, to kind of break those foods down to obtain the nutrients that can get absorbed through our intestines into our blood and get distributed around the body. But it just seems like we've made nutrition, we've made diet, we've made health, mental health, physical health really, really overly complicated. The whole
Yeah.
diet industry is just, I studied nutrition for 3 years, and it made me really like kind of just not respect the diet industry whatsoever, because
Mm.
it's just an absolute mess, like trying to figure out what's the new latest trendiest way, and it's always connected to weight loss and like looking better rather than like thinking about like how we're feeling. And yeah, it's just wild. So that was a really beautiful
Mm.
a breakdown of the importance of understanding that these tiny little nutrients, these vitamins, these minerals, and how essential they are to creating the building blocks, to create the structures, to create the functions that we need to have, let's just say, decent, optimal, thriving neurological health.
Right. And because I keep emphasizing minerals and vitamins, I should add, especially for the structures of your cells, you need omega-3 fatty acids
Hmm.
because they're in the cell walls of all of our brain cells. You need amino acids. You need other things too. And probably you need about 1,000 different phytonutrients that haven't been named or studied yet. Some people say it's more like 15,000. We don't really know. But the solution is very simple. Eat real food. Make sure that you're getting all the colors and eat your prebiotics so you don't have to go and buy probiotics for your gut. Eat your prebiotics to feed healthy gut bugs that we all want to be living in our system.
Wonderful. I just want to share a little clip. I was just going through the True Hope archives of video content and news articles, and you pop up in many of the. I think before 2006, each research paper that was coming out within Canada about Empower Plus and its incredible effects, there were news stories after news stories after news stories, and then about 2004, 2006, that just completely stopped. So there's some really amazing older footage that I'd love to just share. It's a 90-second clip, and for those people who are just listening and not watching, you're still going to get something from this. I'm just going to play this clip because Bonnie features heavily in some of this, and I have a couple of follow-up questions after. So I'm just going to play this video for you so you can just sit back and enjoy, everyone.
No longer experience any of the symptoms of bipolar affective disorder.
Both his children, he says, are still on the supplements and are well some 4 years later. Now, doctors at the University of Calgary say they have intriguing early results from a group of 10 bipolar patients on the same supplements. Most had less depression, fewer manic episodes, and improved mental well-being.
The decrease in their symptoms is of a magnitude that is very impressive. Any medication that ever had this effect would catch a lot of people's attention.
These days, the supplement is approved as a natural health product, the label stating it offers nutritional support for mental well-being.
People call it a micronutrient sledgehammer.
Dr. Bonnie Kaplan recently analyzed a database of almost 360 adults with bipolar disorder. They took the supplement daily for 6 months. By the end, more than half of patients saw at least a 50% improvement in symptoms.
Some people seem to have inherited a need for an unusual amount of those vitamins and minerals. I think that is explaining a lot of what's going on.
Dr. Bonnie Kaplan says some people's brains just need more of certain vitamins and minerals, but it's hard to say which. Empower Plus takes a shotgun approach.
I love that. My favorite thing about that is that amazing jacket you've got on in that interview. It's very snazzy. I wonder if you've still got that somewhere.
I think I do. I don't grow things anymore.
Wonderful. Well, what really struck me on that was when you're talking about that some people require large amounts of nutrition or large amounts of vitamins or minerals, and it's probably very difficult to get specific with what those are, but it could be very helpful to be taking a good quality broad spectrum micronutrient on the daily. But can you explain to us a little bit about why some people require more nutrients than others?
Yes, I can use very solid physiological information about this, but the bottom line is I cannot test you, Simon, or me to find out which ones what we might need more of, because it's in your brain, and the only way to get at that level is to look at metabolites. Anyway, so it's been known for a long, long time that enzymes have a different amount of, I think of it as stickiness, okay, to grab hold of cofactors and hold on to them and use them. And it's a quantifiable thing. It's called Micheli's constant. And there is no question in physical health, it's been shown that the Micheli's constant will vary for different nutrients and be associated with different disorders. And there was a review paper in 2002 by Bruce Ames, who's a very famous biochemist, summarizing some of those inherited mutations. You can think of them that way. They are inherited. We call them polymorphisms. It's a different way in which you've inherited the Micheli's constant for different enzymes and different cofactors. So we know about that variability, but we don't have any way to test it in a living human brain. So, Simon, you might need more magnesium and vitamin B6 than the average person. I might need more zinc and copper than the average person. Who knows? And that's why I call Empower Plus and all the broad spectrum formulas, with respect, I call them shotguns. Fortunately, if we don't utilize some of what we're consuming, they're almost all water soluble and you just pee them out. There's nothing toxic. In study after study, maybe I'll throw this in here, Julia and I and the other teams who've been studying these formulas have always followed up and evaluated people for adverse effects, for uh, bad blood tests or heart rate or blood pressure, whatever. There has never been a significant adverse effect because they're broad spectrum, but they're not toxic. So that's why a shotgun makes perfect sense until we have more appropriate testing.
Interesting. That's a great answer. Do you recommend like people just like obviously you've got such a background in regards to the research and the science of these nutrients and all these broad spectrum like micronutrients in general. Do you recommend them like just to like let's just say like friends and family? Like would you because you without you can't really do the tests to recognize what you may be lacking, what you might need more of than this other person. Like would you just like recommend that like most people just consume something like this just to cover their bases?
Yeah, given what I know about soil depletion, I absolutely do. And the question that usually comes to me is, Bonnie, what do you take? And it's from people who know that I have a lot of family health issues. People don't live very long in my family, but it's heart and stroke. There's never been any mood or anxiety or mental health problems in any generation that I know of. So this is not a problem for me, and I've been blessed with a really pretty calm, stable mood. That's something you either have or you don't. But if you don't, you should be looking at giving yourself more minerals and vitamins. So what I say to them is, of course, I take a broad spectrum formula. I just don't take as high a dose as someone who's trying to treat, mood swings or depression or something, because I don't have those problems. And I am what one do I take? Well, I'm a scientific research snob. So I'm only going to take one that's been studied and shown to have an impact. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with all the other stuff over the counter that's out there, but I'm going to take something which has been studied.
I think that's a very smart way to go, and I think a lot of people can get because a lot of those products can be quite expensive, and people can get drawn away from those. But I think it's important to recognize that some of those products, that not all of the products have the research behind them that actually prove that they actually work, and being able to have trust in a consistent product is absolutely key to obviously not only you to take it to know that you're getting that on a daily basis, but that must have been key for your research in the clinical setting, because you want to be able to actually know exactly what you're getting every time with the research.
That's right. And since day one, I've always been able to say there are no secrets about these formulas. Go look at a bottle, go look at their website. They list every single ingredient. And that's good.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think
Mhm.
that's really, really helpful to be able to look at what this product actually has behind it and look at the science and the research. And it's just a shame that let's just say the conventional community has not embraced this, because I feel like a lot of people have suffered for many, many years unnecessarily because of this. And something you said earlier in the show, which kind of just like hit me a little bit, that the brain and the heart have such a metabolic load that they require they just require a lot extra. And then we see a
Mhm.
lot of cardiovascular disease, we see a lot of brain disease at the end of life. And potentially, if somebody has been living for 10, 20, 30 years significantly nutrient deficient, and it just makes sense that maybe those parts of the body might be the ones to kind of like give up and have issues with later on in life.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I just want to finish off. We like to finish off the show with some solution based ideas to a kind of specific question. And that question is for you, Bonnie, is which foods should we absolutely avoid to improve our brains?
Oh, that's really easy. Anything which is ultra processed. There's a wonderful review article that came out a couple years ago, an umbrella review of thousands and thousands of people who've been studied in terms of their nutrient intake and their health from ultra processed versus whole foods. And there's no question that this is people who rely on ultra processed stuff too much. I don't like calling it ultra processed foods. I like calling it ultra processed rubbish because it's not food. And eating those things definitely are associated with depression and anxiety, plus a whole host of other cancer, cardiovascular disease, etc. Now, you don't have to be totally purist. There is some small amounts of processing, moderate processing, which is not a problem, like frozen vegetables. When I buy a bag of frozen peas, um, I know that they were frozen right after they were harvested, and they might well have more nutrients in them than the peas that have been sitting over in the produce department for a few days.
Interesting.
So there's no question that we underestimate the value of frozen and good canned products also. So, and those are not called whole foods. They're called moderately, or depending on whether you're using the NOVA classification, which is 4 levels, or the usual one of 3 levels, they fall in the in between. But the ultra processed rubbish is replacing what we should be eating. And this umbrella review that I'm talking about, I just can't remember the reference right now, but anybody can write me on my website for it if they're very interested. Their discussion section of that article is very interesting because they address the issue, are people sicker because they're eating the ultra processed food? Is it toxic to them? Or are they sick because it is replacing the whole foods that would be keeping them healthy? And they come down on the side of, we have really good evidence that it's replacing the healthy food. We don't have as clear evidence of ultra processed stuff having a toxic, carcinogenic, unhealthy effect. So this is what I've been teaching for a long time, that I don't know about the toxic effect of the ultra processed chemicals, but I do know that if you're eating that junk, you are not eating an apple a day. You're not eating raw veggies. You're not eating other fruits, etc. So that's how we should eat. The number one thing everyone should do before they start supplementing with a broad spectrum formula or anything is to clean up their diet. And by the way, they'll save money. There is a myth out there that to eat whole food costs more money. That is only true if you expect to eat steak and lobster every week. But if you learn how to cook with beans and legumes, more vegetables, etc., especially the dried beans and dried lentils, etc., it is much cheaper. And there's one study out of Australia that showed that you can save 20% of your food budget. These days, that's a very important fact to know.
Absolutely. Now, that probably doesn't even take into account the fact that if you are on an ultra processed diet for long periods of time, you are inevitably going to have some sort of condition, whether that's digestive or otherwise, and you're going to have to pay for potentially doctor's appointments, medications,
healthcare, right?
treatments, healthcare, etc. So that could certainly get more and more expensive. But I know you're pressed for time here, Bonnie. So I just want to thank you so much for coming onto the show, talking about your book, talking about your career. Where's the best place for people to connect with you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, it's my website. And to find me on the internet and find my website, you have to know my middle initial, because there are other Bonnie Kaplans out there. So my middle initial is J, and my website is bonniejkaplan.com. And my website is, you can contact me there, you can email me and Julia, and we always answer those emails. And you can take a look at videos. There's even a 5-minute video you might want to look for. It's on YouTube, but it's easiest to find, I think, from my website, where I explain how those metabolic pathways work with pictures, which makes it a little easier.
I'm going to make a note of that, and I'm going to get that. I'm going to write a link of that. I'm going to put a link of that into the show notes so people can get straight to that. So that's wonderful.
Sure.
And I've been trying to get Julia on the show for a couple of years, so I think she's due another email, so I'll send her another one because I'd love to get her on the show to explain maybe like what's the latest in regards to broad spectrum micronutrients, the research and mental health. That would be very interesting to learn about. But okay. Bonnie, thank you so much for coming on the show again. I really appreciate it. This was wonderful.
That's quite my pleasure. Thank you, Simon. Have a good day.
Of course, and you. Thank you so much for joining us here on True Hope Cast, the official podcast for True Hope Canada. We'll be back with you next week. There'll be information in the show notes if you want to connect with Bonnie, but that is it for this week. We'll see you soon.